Okay, guys, I'm going to show you a more advanced way to do RAG or Retrieval-Augmented Generation in Mind Studio. And before I do that, let me give a quick overview of what the old way of doing RAG was. So you'd start with a user's question, and then you go into sort of an optimized query for RAG. You can use an LLM for this very easily. And then we would query the data source and then display the answer. Now, there's multiple ways to go fixing this. Maybe you can turn this into 5 different queries and then feed this into the data source 5 times and then aggregate that and then maybe display, and you might get a better response. But for the most part, you're going to get a bit of an hallucination from this, especially if your data is a lot and it has to go through a lot of sources to find the information. So you have a risk of hallucination with this. This more advanced way of doing it attempts to reduce the amount of hallucination. So the user's question goes here and the user's response is over here. Let's go through how this kind of works. So the question is here, and we're going to take the question and we're going to break it up into 2 different types of queries. One is the semantic query, which is similar to the RAG optimized query. And we're also going to have the keyword query. And the keyword query is going to be based on the specific keywords that are in the question. And so in this particular question, these are like cap, loose, bottles, loose caps, and a certain matching cap, like a keyword. In this case, it's going to be cap. And for this route we're going to take is we're going to use this semantic query to query the data source. So this is called semantic or similarity search in this case, because we're looking for content that is similar matching to this. Okay, we have a data source block for this. This particular way is using a SQL query to query the database. And it's going to be a SQL database, structured data. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to collect matching results for these types of keywords. Then we're going to combine these into a merged result. And then we're going to pick the best 3 to 5 chunks or results, you want to say, out of these, and then drop any weak or ones that just don't match. And then we're going to use that to answer the user's question with an LLM. This will be what we're going to be using to answer. So it goes through a much longer approach, but we're now splitting this up into a keyword query and a semantic query, and then we're going to then use different approaches doing that. Now, I think this is going to be a 2-part series I'm going to do. And in the first part, I'm just going to show you how I went about and getting this portion done. Because obviously, most of us know how to do this, but how do you get this part done? And it turns out that Mind Studio actually has a database section that they quietly kind of released that you can use to create a database of your content. So in this case, the content is an SOP of using autoclave, and it teaches sort of the purpose and scope and all these different things. Your standard SOP for a particular piece of equipment. And there's things like what you should never do and safety and all that kind of stuff. And let's say you have a chatbot in the chemistry lab that people can access, that can ask questions. And we want to make sure that the answers are fairly correct. So we're going to take this. What I've done is the first thing we do is divide this text into chunks. Now, obviously, there's a lot of parsers and stuff out there, but in Mind Studio, what we can do is we can actually use an LLM assistant chunker, what I call, and it's going to basically divide this whole text into specific types of chunks that we define by JSON. So in this case, it's going to be like index, headings, content, tags, and everything's going to be organized into a structured data, because this is unstructured data right now. We're trying to convert it into structured data. With structured data, you need tables, you need columns, you need rows, right? So once you do that, we're going to create an output that's supposed to look something like this. And we're going to then feed this using a run workflow into an insert query, which is a SQL query. Here I have a bit of a cleanup text block where it cleans up the text because sometimes there's commas, brackets, and stuff like that. They can interfere with the SQL query. But whatever we're doing right now is we have an insert into this database that we have, I'll show you in a second. And then basically we're filling every single row and column with the information that we collected from here. Okay. And it's running sequentially and it's running all the basically information that we gathered from here. And after all of this, we end up something like this. We have a database. And as you can see here, headings, content, tags, chunk index, word count, section type. So now that we have all this, we can use this to going back to this board again. And we're going to use this to then query our database. Because now we have basically a database of our original unstructured text, which was right here. And this is possible, obviously, with different types of text. I mean, here I just put in text, but it could have been, we could be using sales data, we could be using product information, all kinds of things we could have been used for this. But for this purpose, I just did this because sometimes RAG can create hallucinations, and this would be a very good use case for that. But yeah, that's basically what I wanted to show you in this first part. And in the next part is where I will then go into more detail in terms of what this will be. And then we can also share the remix link of this. But I am working on a couple things in the background. As you can see, my data source block is a little bit playing funky right now. So, but anyway, I will see you in the next part 2. And we'll go into finishing this off and how to get to here.